Ladies and gentlemen, this is the late game episode 35. I'm here with Destiny and In Control and our second guest for the evening, QXC. Today we're going to be talking with QXC about the Adepts and the Liberators. Also, In Control plays a hell of a lot of ladder on the Legacy of the Void beta, so those guys will be our main crutches for this discussion. We did have a replay that was played by Dragon. It was a really, really awesome game that he played yesterday, and it was just constant Adept aggression, followed on by Storms. I think he continued with the Depths and High Templar, Archon, and he used Liberators pretty nicely to zone out the units, things like that. So, unfortunately, we'll try to get next week to be able to bring the replay on and actually do play-by-play analysis. But in the meantime, I'm going to kick it over to QXC. We're going to start with you, and I want your overall opinion just on the Liberator in the TVP matchup, and if you've been using it.
Sure. So the Liberator's primary purpose is its air-to-ground attack. It has an air-to-air attack, but it's not really useful for anything. Phoenixes beat it, Void Rays beat it. You wouldn't catch Oracle, so whatever. Now that you can just get the Siege mode upgrade just by building an armory, it's available pretty early, so you can do things like a 2-base timing, early 3-base timings with it. So Liberator is accessible pretty early on, but it's hard to commit to very early without taking a big risk because it's so vulnerable to things like Stargate units. Mm-hmm. As far as mid and late game usage, since it does 85 damage a hit, there's not a lot of damage wasted, and because the Protoss units are relatively slow, it's hard for them to reposition. So normal usage of the Liberator is like bio-medevac mine, so that your opponent can't just blink underneath the Liberators or blink around them. The mines help keep the Liberators safe if anything goes around or gets too close, and then you just kind of leapfrog the Liberators closer and closer to the Protoss' base and pick off units.
Okay. In Control, playing Protoss against Terran, what are your experiences going up against the Liberator?
I actually really like it right now in the sense that people are experimenting with like timing attacks. We're seeing it in TVZ as well. Liberator Hellbat is something that's a thing I've been told. Obviously not first-hand experience there. In the TVP matchup, I've seen it as a part of a mech timing attack, and then I've been quite surprised by its strength. Like the nice thing about it is that some of the units have had unfortunate roles where it's like you'll see it in the early game and then it fucking disappears forever, right? Or you'll specifically see it in the middle of the game and then it disappears forever or late game. This unit, I feel like, has some viability across the spectrum. It obviously ebbs and flows. I don't necessarily think it's like it's not like it used to be with the Cyclone where it's like, well, you make them early, and then you make them mid, and you keep fucking making them till late, and then you just hopefully have 200 of Cyclones. Like that was really boring, bad StarCraft. And I feel like the Liberator is a really cool unit in that you can get it early, but that pinches your economy a little bit. It's not necessarily a one-hit wonder. Like it can get blinked under. If they do a blink opening, it's tough, and stuff like that. So I'm actually kind of over the moon with the unit. It's really fucking powerful too. I got surprised. One game I was like, you know what? These gosh darn Colossus, I'm going to try them out. Like, they can't be that bad. I walked in with like 10 Colossus and the usual cast of supporting guys, and he remaxed on, like a dozen Liberators, and they fucking annihilated it. And that's what I deserve. That's what I should have got. But I just like that they seem to be a pretty well-rounded, good unit, in my opinion.
Cool. So, in the matchup, I guess...
Are you going to ask me my opinion about him?
Steven, have you played Legacy of the Void and gone up against the Liberator yet?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
I agree with pretty much everything Jeff said, though. Yeah, they seem pretty cool. I like that they use some timing attacks. That's all I had.
Thank you, Steven.
Hey, Kevin, are they stronger in TVZ, though? Like, I have a student, and he's lower level, but I'm being told that, like, Liberator Hellbat is super, super strong. Is that...
So the secret, which BC and I discovered, are Ravagers.
Yeah, those are...
the Liberator like sieges and then sits in place, and then the Ravager
just ravage that spot and they die. Yeah.
You have
How
just
many
enough...
shots is it? Is it 3 or...
Three, I think.
People are rediscovering the Ravager. It's so funny because like for a while when they were ridiculously strong, everyone was like, "Oh, geez, this is like one-base Ravagers." Then they nerfed it. They disappeared completely. Like nobody made a single fucking Ravager. Then they put the range back at 6, and all of a sudden, my Protoss brain is breaking every game where I'm like, well, okay, I'm behind, but I have 8 sentries, so I'll just force field everything forever and be fine. And then he shows up and I'm like, oh, Jesus, it's Ravagers! What are those things? They just stomp the force fields, and it's nice. I think they've come back in a good way. In a good way. Like, this is what they should have been.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, I agree. The design of the Ravager now is a lot better than it was before. Before it was just like, hey, this unit does like as much damage output as a Marine, and it's got this like bile thing, and you can get it at hatch tech, and I don't really understand like what the drawbacks of it were, and then they made it right, and then they made it like
It's cheap. It builds fast. It outranges all stack defenses. It was like, yeah, you kind of just...
That was like the craziest thing about the Ravager. Like I played so many games where I was trying to do these timing attacks, and then I played the ZVZ where this guy fucking wrecked me with Ravagers. I had no idea how he got him out so fast, and that was the game that I found out. Oh, you can get Ravagers without even making a fucking lair. Wait, are you serious? Holy shit! Yeah, that unit's pretty good, or was like really ridiculous.
It was broken. No, it's good.
Yeah, it's in a good spot with the 6 range. I don't really see them much. As far as Liberator Hellbat against Zerg goes, I don't think that's a comp that's going to stick around for very long. I think it's kind of like Mass Reaper against Zerg. You know, when you don't really understand the game or you haven't seen it before, it's going to kill you. But I don't think it's going to stick around for much longer.
I can agree. I think a lot of Zergs are already figuring it out and getting rid of the timing pretty easily. One thing I will say, though, is I was watching Top Play, and he has just enough time. If you see they do have Ravagers, right, there's just enough time to move it out of the way before you get hit. But you have to act like almost preemptively before you think
the
they're
Liberator? You can unsiege it and not get hit?
Yeah.
It unsieges really quickly. It unsieges faster than it sieges, which is
4 seconds and 2 seconds, I think.
I don't know.
Okay.
Slower and faster.
Yeah. So overall, I think the unit's being pretty well received. I did like the armory change, and at first, we watched Lycan League last week. A lot of people were dying to Liberator Hellbat pushes. I think that's how the STC closed out his series in the last in the finals. But then you have people shutting it down now already on the ladder. So I like the unit. I really do. I think it offers a unique dynamic to the different matchups. Let's now turn it to the Adept, and we'll go to In Control first on the Adept. And, aside from any crazy all-in, how's the Adept working into your play?
It is a core unit, and that's something that it was intended to be, actually. One of the fears that I know Destro was having in particular, and some other people, was that it would replace the Zealot altogether. With only 25 gas being the difference between the two of them, like, range, durability, the ability to project itself forward, like, it seems like a steal in that regard. I don't necessarily think he's wrong. But yeah, the Adept doesn't have a whole lot of drawback. Like, things like Lurkers really eat them up, but guess what? Lurkers eat everything on the ground pretty good, so it's not like the Adept specifically is at risk there. And then its early game shenanigans is very powerful. A lot of salt about that unit, and I do think it's one of those, like, it seems to be a traditional Protoss unit that is made to make lower level players very upset because it's extremely easy to use, and when you make a lot of them, they tank well and they deal decent damage to light units in particular. So it's like, if you're not a more skilled StarCraft player, the Adept must be this really salt-inducing thing. For me personally, and how I've seen it implemented, it's really cool across the board in the different matchups, and I don't. A guy was posting on Team Liquid saying that he's got this 1-base 4-gate Adept Warp Prism build that kills Terran like 95% of the time. Whatever. Those kind of builds come around, and usually people find out that they're not as strong as they thought, but it just does well in a certain meta. And right now, obviously, 1-Rax Expand is like the dominant thing for Terrans. I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, I actually pretty much like it. I don't know that it's. I think if it gets nerfed, it'll fall the way of the Reaper, where it's like it's not super good, in my opinion, but it is good. Definitely, it is good. I would never tell you otherwise, but I don't think it's broken. I think it's pretty okay, and it's being seen in all 3 matchups, which is a cool thing for a unit. But it's also not like your endgame army is literally just Adepts. If you do that, you will die across the board, all 3 matchups. Yeah. And in PvP, actually, while it can be a core unit, you do trade it out for the more heavy-hitting stuff later in the matchup, which I also like as well. So I actually think it makes the game more interesting right now as it is.
So I would like to see the Adepts early game utility toned back a little bit, and its mid and late game utility increased slightly. So I think the potential here of what you were alluding to, like, oh, I made 2 adepts and I killed your 5 marines and then the game ends. It's actually very high, and it's very frustrating. It's very annoying. We've seen Terran players have seen a lot of like, I'm going to get a Nexus, I'm going to make 10 probes on it, and then I'm going to 4-gate Adept Warp Prism. And if you don't scout the Warp Prism before it, because it's going to drop 4 Adepts and then it's going to warp 4 more in. If you don't get to that Warp Prism before those 4 extra Adepts warp in, the game ends. And
so on that concept, like I agree with you pretty much absolutely. I think one of the things that, and I hope like it's actually worked out pretty nicely, and I hope this is on purpose, is I feel like TVP it's actually quite a bit stronger almost in the mid and late game because Terrans don't have to worry about diversifying their composition. Like in the past, it used to be, hey, I'm going Colossus. No, it's a trick. It's 1 no-range Colossus, and I'm going ground. And the Terran is tricked because they have 8 Vikings, but that was all it took to throw them off. Now, there's no tricking Terran. You're not going Colossus. And if you do, you know, it's actually, you tricked yourself. You're like, well, maybe, you know. And I'm not even exaggerating, guys. Like, I'm not being pessimistic. It's actually that bad. Like, just straight up Marauder Medevac Marine will just sidestep whatever it is and shoot the Colossus that's doing almost no damage anyways. So right now, I'm finding, like, the mid-game of TVP very robust for Terran. I'm not sitting here saying it's broken or like, there's nothing we can do. But what I am saying is that if they do tinker with the early game, they have to be careful. Because like what Kevin said, I don't disagree, but they would have to buff something in the mid-game. Because if Terran can comfortably, in the early game, not scan, not really scout, except for the normal like Oracle DT shenanigans, which are both simplified by a missile turret, then all of a sudden things are getting a little bit... Like, if they seamlessly go into the mid-game, it's really fucking hard for Protoss there.
So what I'm imagining is something like Adepts have 10 less shields or 20 less shields, but then the Twilight upgrade gives them an additional 20 or something like that. Or the psionic transfer, the image projection lasts like 1 or 2 seconds shorter, but then the Twilight upgrade brings it back up to what it is now. Because the Adept,
easy fixture, right?
It feels really good in the mid game. Like, it's a super strong harass unit. It's incredibly annoying to deal with, but it's not like 2 Adepts get into your mineral line 10 minutes into the game and you lose. It's like, yeah, you'll take some damage. That's okay. It's just that early game where, like, oh, you were macroing and, like, the 2 Adept images got up your ramp because you didn't wall off, and, like, now they're trading with your Marines, and there's an Oracle coming in, and then the game ends. And those are the kind of situations that feel really bad with the Adept right now.
Yep.
I can agree with that. So
I feel like some of the Adept itself. This is like a really weird thing that I didn't feel this way at all with Heart of the Storm or Wings of Liberty, but I feel like some of the units in StarCraft 2 like don't look like the Legacy of the Void units, which is weird because normally this doesn't happen, but it feels like they don't look how they are. I guess like was it the Cyclone that was like super fast, really tanky, and like really small and what the fuck? The Adept feels the same way. When I started playing some games and I've got like 6 roaches and they do 2 volleys and it's like still alive, it's like, what the fuck? Like, this thing has so much life. Like, I don't know, that looks really weird.
It'd be like in HOTS if the Colossus was the size of a Marine. I mean, that's an extreme example, but like, you'd have a really hard time visually relating how it looks to how strong it is. And yeah, the Adept is definitely like that. Like,
which is weird because normally the art in StarCraft 2 is like always been one of its strongest points where things look and act like that. So but that was so weird with the Adept. Yeah, it's so fucking strong.
It's only like slightly bigger than a Marine, but it's like 4 times as tanky as one. Yeah. Okay. And going back to the Zealot thing, so I know they're working on some other ways to differentiate the Zealot from the Adept. We'll have to wait and see what those are, but I've heard through the grapevine that there are plans to try and experiment with that, because Blizzard is aware right now that the Zealot and the Adept have slightly too many overlapping roles.
Okay. My question is, and yeah, you know what? I'm going to take advantage of having you here, Kevin. How are you opening against Protoss to be able to do what you want to do in the game?
So there's basically two main styles, and they're not much different from HOTS. You know, you tech, you go mines or medevacs or whatever, and then you go into bio, or you go into bio and then you go into bio. And
so just 3 racks after expand.
yeah, it's the main thing against Protoss and Legacy is just make sure you wall off and that you have good scouting. And normally the scouting is like seeing their tech building on one base or like their early tech building after they've taken their nexus. I think the more important scout here, if you can see the tech building, that's good. But seeing the probe count on the natural and the gases is usually more informative because it's pretty easy for them to hide some of the buildings, and it's actually really hard to scout now because the adepts come out so early, and it's like they already have an adept and a mothership core by the time that they would put down their tech building, so usually you can't really get in. It's hard to reliably scan, so you're checking the natural usually just to get an idea, and then it's just wall off, make sure you're paying attention to the adept images, and try and get to the mid game. Once you have medevacs and stim and shields, it's pretty straightforward, very much like HOTS.
Okay. Are you adding ghosts in to deal with the tankiness of the adept?
It's like a late game thing, but usually
Ghosts or Widow Mines. Widow Mines do
Yeah.
fine too.
Widow Mines are usually the go-to because they're just easier to get.
Right.
Like you already have the factory, it doesn't make your army that much smaller. Whereas like ghosts cut into your barracks production time and they're really expensive. And it's like, what does the EMP actually get you versus the Widow Mines? Usually just Widow Mines, but eventually, yeah, you'll add ghosts.
Cool. All right. So that, I guess, was the brunt of the discussion. Steven, do you have any final thoughts? I don't know how much you've been playing Legacy of the Void. So is there anything just in Legacy in general you'd want to talk about?
Not really. I really don't like. I remember I felt this way when I came back because they added the ladder, so I started playing some. One thing that kind of bothered me was it feels kind of weird that like of the new Protoss units that were being added, they feel like a little bit almost like something I would expect to see from the Onion. I don't know. The Adept Active seems a little bit strange. Like we always complain about like lack of counterplay to Protoss, and then you get like the Adept, which it can go invulnerable and run into your base, and you can't do anything about it unless you're walled off. And then you've got like the Disruptor.
Yeah, Disruptor.
Yeah, that goes invulnerable and then attacks you, and you can't do anything about it. It's like, well, okay, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Otherwise, the game feels like decent right now. Aside from maybe some Protoss issues, I like what's going on with it. I guess we'll wait and see how things pan out. So continue to work on it.
Yeah, I think overall Legacy feels like it's a pretty good spot, except in general Protoss feels a little weak later in the game and a little bit too strong with the early game. And that mostly comes back to the Adepts. Like they just don't scale super well into the late game. And with the Colossus gone and the Disruptor in kind of a questionable place, I don't know. Jeff, what do you think about the new Disruptor?
You feel like a fucking baller when it's used in those right situations, right? Like I actually had a nice comeback PvP where he didn't have blink, it was low econ situation, and the Disruptor just wrecks, you know, if you can't get away from it. But yeah, in mega late game as a part of a fight, I find it to be like one of those things where it's like, if you look away, 3 Disruptors will blow up your entire army. If you're paying attention and playing on par, they should do almost nothing. You know, like the damage they actually do is you had to run as opposed to stay and fight, so I'm doing damage to your army. And because they reduce the cost of them, I think that's drawing it closer to having more utility in that way. And because the Robo's otherwise useless, except for if you're making Immortals or War Prisms.
Oh, I was going to ask, have you played it post-nerf?
Yeah.
Was it a nerf?
It seems like, oh,
they
yeah.
shortened the radius by a lot.
Yeah.
But they also made it way cheaper. So
yeah,
100 gas cheaper.
Yeah.
It feels really bad right now. It almost feels worthless. Like
it's not the same. It was too strong before. Probably the radius was probably too big. But then it was also like it's in a weird place because I don't disagree with you guys at all in the sense that like it was too big, but then it was too expensive for what it is because it's like one of those things where it's like, holy fuck, if I hit you, yes, I'm gonna win this game, or it's like, holy fuck, he's no, you know, like. And people were like rushing him out to defend against Ravagers, but that's a dark era back then. But now it's like, you know, they're not the Colossus. They're not going to be. They're very special units that they require a lot of control. They're best with warp prisms, which are fantastic. I love the warp prism mechanic, but that's really hard on a lot of people. And then I can also see this again being one of those salt-inducing units where it's like, I can see the guys in gold and silver who are like, yeah, so hi, I'm playing this guy who shows up with 12 disruptors and They're invincible. They kill me. I've checked Steven's blog. It's probably supposed to be made by The Onion. Like, this is so fucking terrible. And people are like, well, you're supposed to kite or pick up. And he's like, well, I can't fucking micro. Shut your face. Like, I hate you, you know? Like, it's going to be bad in that sense. But at the higher level, I think they're going to be very ineffective. They're going to be harassing mineral lines, and then, like, that'll go on for 20 seconds, and the guy's like, oh, shit, I have to make a Viking as a Terran. I have to make a single fucking Viking. Or I already have Liberators. Like, either one, you know?
I think like another thing that goes into it, and this is starting to feel. Oh, let me preface this first, so that it doesn't sound like I'm being horribly biased. It feels like, and I'm only playing. I think I'm like Masters or whatever on the beta right now. I haven't played too much. Lurkers feel way too strong. They feel
very strong.
In Brood War, it was kind of hard, but you could actually dodge lurker shots in Brood War. Like you could micro around the volleys, which could be really important parts of the micro. I don't think that's possible in Legacy of the Void. Those shots are like almost instant. The range is massive, and the damage is huge. Like you could be fighting a Protoss army, like run up like 6 lurkers to the side, and then they try to kill them, but you like 4 burrowed, and like all your fucking army is dead. Like you're completely fucked.
The funny thing about their range is like so what you would do, because you can't contest them as a Protoss on the ground. The only thing you can do is like partition them off and pick them out. You know, like classic stuff, but the casting range for force field it's less than the range of the lurker. So a lot of times what happens, the lurker actually burrows. You're like, oh Jesus, force field off, and then they kill all the sentries that did that anyways.
Yeah. The lurker feels. I don't know how the range couldn't have been that long in Brood War, right? Because I feel like in Brood War they were used for like. They were like zone control, and like you had to be really careful in the positioning. And like in StarCraft 2, it's like, okay, I got fucking 8 lurkers. Like let's fucking run up and see what happens. Like I don't know.
They were 6 range in Brood War. They were the same range as a Dragoon.
It's more that Dragoons tanked against them decently well, but also that you needed to have Dark Swarm to make lurkers really strong. And in that case, you knew, okay, well I'm going to back off because I can't fight here.
Right.
But so it was like a Zerg force field, kind of. But every like Terran and Protoss had tanky units, or they had like a Reaver, which is a mainstay of the army, and Storm, which is actually stronger in Brood War. Yeah. So they had ways to deal with it as it's coming at them. And then Terran, of course, would just, like they were just fucking all over the place with Marine Medic. But they could also, if you get really fancy, use like Science Vessel shields, and then you go over here, and if they're shooting this guy, then the lurker dies in 2 seconds.
Right. I'm just trying to imagine Brood War lurkers with 9 range. And I think it would be like kind of like this. Like it would just fucking break the entire game.
Yeah. And again, looking at everything you mentioned in Brood War, and we're not going down this route. The Milkus route of dick riding everything in Brood War. But all of the counterplay in Brood War is interesting. Like you bring up like the Science Vessel. You remember the games where you'd have like the Science Vessels and the Scourge playing the back and forth.
It's the best.
You'd have like the Plague and the Science Vessel going back and forth. The Science Vessel trying to land irradiates the Plaguers. The Defilers trying to land Plagues. Like all that counterplay. The counterplay was interesting. Arbiters dropping stasis. The Reaver and the Shuttle Micro. The high-tech. Like all of that was interesting. One of the problems I feel that Protoss has always suffered, and this kind of goes back to like my whole like Protoss is dirty like that thing, is that it's really hard. I feel like it's really hard to like cheer for or to feel good. Like Protoss always feels like the villain. It seems. Maybe I'm biased to play Zerg, but like in all the games, like when they win, like the wins just feel so dirty. The immortal Sentry wins, like fuck, like you walk in and force everything's like, okay, I mean, good job, you won. And like I feel like when I look at units like the Adept and the Disruptor, it's kind of like the same shit. Or like remember PvZ in like 2012 when it was just like it was literally just Colossus Sentry and the Zerg could do nothing but make those god awful units the Corruptor, and like that was it. And then it was just like every game was a steamroll and shit like that. And it seems like you run into things where like Protoss is all built around, well, counterplay is really hard. Or you have to do something before the Protoss gets to this point, otherwise you're fucked. Like if they're dropping disruptors in your base out of the warp prism, like, oh well, now you're fucked because it's all invulnerable and they can pick up from a range and you're fucked. Or like, oh well, you let 2 adepts, do their little spell bullshit outside your base, now they're in their base fucking you. Or oh, he got good force field, so you deserve to lose your whole army. Or oh, you want to attack, but he's got the mothership core and now he casts photon overcharge and now you can't really go in and attack at all. Or oh, like oh well, his whole army's out of position, but he recalled his whole army back using the mothership core and now you can't do it. Like I don't know, like maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it always feels like Protoss has like that trend of like kind of like cock block, like anti counterplay, like it just kind of does its stuff, and it's always felt like really weird as a result of that, like the way that Protoss sits as compared to like Terran or Zerg. Not to say that it's too strong or too weak or even to talk about balance, just from like a design point of view. I feel like Protoss has always suffered from that, which is one of the reasons why I was disappointed when like 2 of the new units, the Adept and the Disruptor, both involve instances of invulnerability where it's like, well, okay.
I don't know if I have too much to say about that. It felt pretty. I've always felt frustrated about Protoss, and not from a balance perspective, but more just like the way that you have to play against them, and then the way that you can lose to them. Things like 6-gate, blink, DTs, the one Oracle that flies in your base and the game ends. And Terran has a bit of that, like you look away and
30 probes.
Yeah, you look away and 3 mines burrow and like the game ends.
Sure.
But it feels like Protoss has more of that.
Yes, they're the trickster race in StarCraft 2 for some reason. Like in Brood War and StarCraft before this, they were like the Juggernaut. Like it was just that's the army. Holy fuck! Like how are you gonna deal with that? And everybody else was like smaller collections of armies. But in StarCraft 2, it's definitely like every PvZ. I feel like this so much. I'm like, all right, how are we gonna do this? Let's see.
That feel when the Oracle flies into your midfield, you see the Zerg just like pull drones, like, oh, no spore. Oh, well, I'm gonna go ahead and kill me 7 from 12 drones right here.
While we're on the Protoss topic, I want to query you guys about the and no circle jerk. And this is genuinely, since I have you guys here talking about it, let's talk about the Mothership Core Photon Overcharge, Mothership Core and Photon Overcharge.
Hate it so much.
Terrans hate it, yeah.
The only thing
I think everybody should hate it. Protoss too. Like
even Protoss hates it.
It's like, okay, well, we have a big
I
problem.
know life without it, bro. I'm like, oh no.
Early game is like, well, fuck, we got all these problems with the Protoss. Like, the early game is so fucked. It's like, okay, well, we could try to balance it out using different units, different build. Like, how are we gonna do this? What if we give them a unit that makes like planetary nexus so that they can't just be attacked, and then we just get to the mid game? It's fine. Like, okay, well, I mean, that seems kind of like not the ideal solution, but I guess. I don't know. I think Photon Overcharge is like a huge cock block. It does lend itself to more stability in some matchups, especially PvP, but that stability comes at the cost of like any interesting early mid game. In my opinion, against Protoss. Like, do you feel? I guess QXC or even in Control, although you might have the Protoss Spice, but QXC has the Terran. Do you feel like in PvP that like the existence of the Mothership Core kind of cock blocks the early game?
So the problem though is that I'm trying to remember Protoss without the overcharge, and it was like it's not pretty. It's what you're saying though. It's like
that was before a medevac boost.
Yeah, there were issues.
Oh God.
There are issues with Protoss design-wise and gameplay-wise that were fixed by the Mothership Core and Photon Overcharge. I just don't think that was the way that we wanted.
It was a Band-Aid. That's I think the best word that.
Man, I hate Photon Overcharge. The only thing I hate more than Photon Overcharge is old Swarm Hosts.
I feel it's pretty strong still.
Well,
I mean,
maybe old Infester and Fester Broodlord. Remember those days?
I try not to.
Oh,
okay, so now has there been anything in your mental workings as this discussion has continued to go on that you thought might be a good suggestion for a change to fix the issues that Photon Overcharge just kind of put newspaper on?
So the idea. So part of the problem is that at the same time that they introduced Photon Overcharge to fix some of Protoss's early game stuff, they also introduced new units that fucked Protoss if they didn't have Photon Overcharge. Right? So like Widow Mines, if Terran didn't have Widow Mines, then Photon Overcharge isn't as big of a deal. Like it's still of course useful in a lot of circumstances, but Widow Mines are like, you're not paying attention, you lose the game because you lost 12 probes.
Yep.
And they were introduced at the exact same time, so it's like, well, I don't know about that. But from a pure just like how could we make Overcharge a little nicer to play with without actually making it stronger or weaker? The idea that I had was you make it cost 25 or 50 energy, but then you have the duration be significantly shorter than the cooldown. And so it's a more strategic use. It's not just, oh, I Photon Overcharge, I'm invulnerable for a minute, then I have another 100 energy, I'm invulnerable for another minute. Of course, it's not actually invulnerability.
Invulnerable,
yeah,
as in, I hope he doesn't have 2 medevacs of units, then I'm dead.
It depends what point in the game it is. Like, early game, it is invulnerable.
Yes.
But later in the game, it's not. But so, I'm imagining a Photon Overcharge that costs 50 energy, it lasts for 20 seconds, and it has a 35-second cooldown. And so the idea is, yes, you can use it more frequently in terms of having mana up for it, but there's a very specific window of vulnerability that your opponent can exploit afterwards, and there's a very specific window of vulnerability that you know you have to be ready for when you use it. And so instead of just like this 2 minutes of the Nexus being a planetary fortress, you have the damage coming out, and then you have a window, and then you have more damage. So it creates more play and interactions back and forth. Of course, it might be a terrible idea, right? You never know until you try stuff. Right. That's the first thought that I've had.
I think that's a pretty decent idea, actually. I think it'd be cool to see them throw that in the beta for a little bit to see how it works. Jeff, from the Protoss perspective, has there been any thought of you of what you would like?
You know, for me, like a lot of people feel really strongly about this stuff. To be honest, I'm a little bit more laissez-faire about this. Like I'm okay with a world where you don't have the photon overcharge, but I think it's like, again, to kind of go back to that same idea of like it'll naturally figure itself out. If you do that, you have to give Protoss quite a few different kinds of buffs, and I don't know that people would be happy with those buffs. Of course, when I say people, I mean the majority. Obviously, fucking people are upset about everything.
I'd say fuck Reddit on this. Like, I think most reasonable people 100% would agree with that. Like, everybody that's early, I say that. I mean, I know there's fucking idiots out there, but I would be totally fine with giving Protoss whatever they need to survive the early game or mid game without having to rely on photon overcharge. Like, if you're calling to get rid of the mothership core with no other compensation, then obviously you're fucking idiotic. But like, I don't think anybody reasonable would ever say it's like, oh, like, you know, like Sentry voice build is freaking lame. Mothership core is really lame. Yeah. Like, compensate Protoss with other units. Yeah, sure. I don't think anybody should be opposed
I do
to that.
like, you know, to go back to something Steven was talking about earlier too, where he says, you know, like counterplay. Like there is a little bit of like the early game drop, photon overcharge. Okay, that was shut down, and there's not a whole lot of leeway there. Like the guys that go for it get lucky 1 in 5, but most of the time you pull the probes, the medevac dies, you target down the fucking widow mine, like nothing happens.
Yeah.
So if you buff things like stalkers or whatever, some unit that gives you strength in the early game to defend that, it rewards the player that has positioning. Like, okay, I think he's going drop, so I have my 5 now stronger stalkers, dragoons, whatever in my base, and I pick it off, and they're strong enough to do that. Okay, I'm rewarded for my decision making. That seems more interesting and better. And of course, I think the fear is that sends a ripple through the entire game. Like if you buff Protoss core units, you need to nerf force fields. You need to probably take out photon overcharge. Like you're actually getting into the design of the race, which a lot of people are calling for. And what I can say from our meetings with them, like they're not opposed to. It's something that they're hearing from Koreans, Europeans, non-Koreans, everybody. So it could happen, and it's in the past I've been a lot more flippant about where people are like, we need to redesign Protoss. I'm like, you're a fucking idiot. They'll never do it. No, Jeff was a little bit of a fucking idiot. Like they're actually talking about it. So that would be okay. Like if we make things more interesting to reward better positioning, cool.
I think that they are making some pretty drastic changes. I think that the warp changes in particular, where you have to put a warp gate, you know, like a proxy a warp gate, and then, you know, you can also upgrade a pylon, like those kind of things for early aggression and, you know, forward aggression. I think those are some pretty awesome changes. Did you guys have any thoughts when they announced those changes?
Upgrade pylon, sure, but again, like this goes to the same thing. Like guys, in Legacy of the Void, Protoss is the weakest race. Not nearly as bad as it was. It used to be a joke. It used to be like actually kind of funny. Now there's Protoss making waves, and it's okay. Like when I play and stream for 4 or 5 hours, I don't feel like I'm literally in like the darkest, deepest prison, just getting, you know,
cucked.
Exactly. It's not like that. It's more like, okay, this is pretty cool, and when I lose, it's like, all right, I probably should have seen that coming, or this composition absolutely doesn't work. That happens. But of the 3 races, if we're talking about removing photon overcharge, if we're talking about messing with warp gates, like that's like the only gimmick well, no, that's one of the 3 gimmicks we have. It's really good. You do have to give a buff somewhere else, otherwise they fall completely off the plank. Like that's so Protoss too. Like you come up with a bad map, they're just like, well, okay, I actually can't do anything here. It's like, oh, come on. Zerg and Terran figured it out. They're like, yeah, I know. We're fucked. So this map's not made for Protoss. We're dead.
Yeah, right. Post Disruptor nerf, I think it's unquestionable that Protoss is the worst race at the moment. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think they're gonna. I mean, they're definitely taking into consideration the redesign on certain things. There are certain things they believe are core to the race, but even as a Terran, I want to see Protoss get a little stronger. Just not with the Adept. I hate early game Adepts. I wish they couldn't two-shot my Marines. But yeah, so I think any final thoughts, just Legacy of the Void in general, before we wrap up the show with the questions?
It's just going really well. I think
the ladder was great. Yeah. Thank God they added the ladder. It's so fun. There's other changes they haven't implemented just yet, like some UI ones. The chat's a lot better, although it's kind of weird how hard it is to leave a channel. I feel like
Yeah.
I feel a little bit weird that way.
You are always in SC2 looking for team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to abuse whatever most abusive build comes out until I get Grandmaster, and then once they actually balance the game completely, I'll never be able to do that again. But that's my goal for Legacy of the Void Ladder. And
this is so viewership and popularity aside, this is the brightest time that StarCraft has ever seen. There's more development going on. There's more interaction with the devs, more interaction from Blizzard, more bigger changes coming to the game. That we've never seen anything like this. Even in early StarCraft 2 beta, we didn't have this level of interaction, this level of change, and hope on the horizon. So that's really cool. Like, Legacy is going to be an incredible game. It'll be really interesting to see 1, 2 months, 3 months from now when a lot of these changes finally go through and we see them in the game.
I can agree more. And another thing is, I mean, the tournament scene. I really feel like 2015 and even some of the things we're seeing for early 2016, we've had a lot of content. There have been a lot of SC2 events. So I think we're doing really well right now. We're going to go ahead and kick it into the questions time now, everyone. I actually did vet a lot of these.